Welcome everyone today. Today we have another interview with Emily Fries. Emily, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to us?
Sure. So my name is Emily Fries, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist here in the state of Utah. And I specialize in working with couples and other women's issues. So I'm really excited today to be here and to talk about the fear of divorce. And hopefully people can learn some really good information today. So let me go ahead and get started. So I think the very first thing I want to just say is that going into this topic, I had a lot of research that I wanted to do to make sure that I was not missing anything. And so I just want to start by just doing a simple introduction and talking about the process of ending a marriage is not an easy process. And we know that, there are two sides to every interaction. And that for both individuals who are considering divorce or having problems in their marriage, it is both a psychological and emotional challenge to go through it in the first place. So many times with couples, there's a person who kind of instigates the process of divorce. And so they're kind of ahead of the curve in terms of the psychological and emotional implications of that. And so the person that is being informed often can be taken off base, and they're not really prepared for that. And so regardless of where you are in the process and who's the instigator of the divorce, it's still difficult for both individuals. And so I want to really just emphasize that that's a very challenging thing for men and women to go through, and that the magnitude of their decision to get a divorce can create a lot of intense emotions. And anxiety is one of the most common ones, leading to a variety of different outcomes. And it can be a reflection in many ways of where they're at in their relationship. Some are in denial. Many couples just want to avoid the topic altogether. A lot of people will shut down depending on where they are in their relationship, and often leading them to feeling very stuck or paralyzed in making a decision at all. And so we want to recognize just the amount of stress that going through and considering having a divorce is to individuals. And it can really negatively impact a person's overall well-being, and understand that there's a lot of other risks to that, not just the mental health indications, but also that there are health risks to going through the process of divorce. But there's something that we need to really just call out here, and that the fact is that doing nothing is really difficult as well. So, we don't want to stay stuck. We want to be able to move forward. And yet, this can be different for every single couple, knowing that there's going to be people that just make the decision and go right into it, or it may take years for people to make a decision. And so we want to be aware that ignoring or avoiding the concerns that you may have in your relationship is going to show up in time. And obviously anxiety is part of that. But there's, an important thing to understand, that the psychological stress can also show up physically as well over time. That you can start to see potential health conditions that will show up. Maybe you aren't able to sleep or eat, or maybe you can't function the way that you normally would need to function. And so that's something that we need to be really aware of. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about this, and we'll talk throughout the presentation, that psychologically it's going to show up in various mental health issues. So anxiety, depression, just being apathetic, not really caring or not wanting to do anything. Anger, obviously, is another really big one, depending on how and what the reasons are for a couple getting divorced. And oftentimes in my own practice, one of the most common things I'll see is a feeling of helplessness or hopelessness in the relationship, that can often lead to an outcome of just feeling completely in a place of despair. So one of the things that we need to understand is that these feelings are giving us an indicator, and we have to recognize and know what is the story that these experiences are telling us. What are our emotions saying? And we need to know that our defense system is going to get activated because we can want to avoid. And so some of the things that we can see is self-sabotaging behaviors. Sometimes people start drinking or doing drugs, maybe some process addictions like gambling or shopping or porn or other process addictions might start to increase. We definitely see an increased risk for infidelity or emotional affairs, whether it be sexual, physical, or emotional. Couples who are struggling in their relationship are going to be at greater risk for infidelities. And so we need to know that going forward. So, one of the things that we need to remember is that regardless of where this couple might be, they need to learn how to manage at some point the uncertainty of the inevitable of going through a divorce. And so when a couple gets to a point where they just simply can't resolve issues, they may actually consider separation or divorce as a solution to the problems, because they simply can't resolve conflict no matter how hard they try. Even in therapy, when I'm working with clients, I work with several couples, even right now in my practice, where they are what I consider a high conflict couple. And unfortunately, they simply don't have the skills and may even be unwilling to learn the skills to be able to learn how to better manage conflict. And so they consider divorce as an option because they simply just want the pain to stop. So getting a divorce can generate a lot of uncertainty and fear about a person's future. What is that going to look like? If I do get divorced, I won't have the conflict in my life anymore, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I am confident in what my future is going to look like. And so there is a lot of uncertainty that comes. We need to recognize that this thing called divorce anxiety, or the fear of divorce, is painfully real. So when a person is considering a divorce, there's a lot of emotions that they're going to be feeling. And some days they might feel really confident in their decision. Other days, they may feel really paralyzed by moving forward with making the decision at all. And so, our ability, especially as a clinician, is to try to help couples face those fears and address them so that they can learn how to better manage their anxiety, and to provide them with confidence and the ability to make decisions, even though they're hard decisions, that they can do those things that are necessary to find happiness in their life again, and hopefully provide them with hope in being able to see a future that can be really good, rather than the uncertainty of what they're living with. So we help them to kind of better manage their fears rather than seeing them spiral out of control. So one of the things we want to talk about it specifically is divorce anxiety and fear. And what does that mean? So divorce anxiety and fear are two major emotions that a person that is experiencing relationship issues are going to experience, especially as they're facing divorce. Even though it might be you that might be wanting the divorce, it doesn't mean it's an easy process for you to come to that conclusion, and that you may still feel a lot of anxiety. So what I'll see oftentimes with couples is that a person might come in and say, I'm really unhappy in my marriage, and if things don't change, I just can't do it anymore. And yet at the same time, they're also voicing concern for their partner and being able to say, the last thing I want to do is hurt my partner. I love them, but they're just not meeting my needs. I've been trying so hard to get things to work out. And so even if it's you that's kind of driving the possibility of divorce, it doesn't mean it's an easy decision. And so if you are that individual, going to experience these normal fears that come up because it's really anxiety provoking, not knowing what that future holds. You're going to be thinking about things like children, finances, family, friends, and how things are going to change, and in those external relationships that may have been built because of the relationship within the marriage. And so, another thing that a lot of people are fearful of, obviously, would be, okay, I get divorced and then I have to go back out and start dating again and start being involved with that whole unknown world. And I can say, even from my experience, watching adults that do go through a divorce and they put themselves back out there again, it's such a different world now compared to what they may have grown up in, where, right now there's this online dating, prospect, and they're like, I don't even know how to do that. And so there's a lot of fear of the unknown, of how do I move into such a new way of relating to people, because I haven't had to worry about that for 25 years. And so it's really something that can be very fearful for a lot of people. Let's see. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about survival instinct. And a lot of people might be going, why are you talking about survival instinct when it comes to divorce? But I think it's important to know that when we are in a relationship, we've developed what we call a secure attachment, or a secure bond with this person. And as a relationship begins to fail, or as the relationship begins to feel more and more insecure, where they're not feeling the same kind of love and stability that they once had in their relationship, it motivates this feeling of survival. And this survival instinct that kicks in, that we all have, is really something that gets sparked during the divorce process. And so this man by the name of Robert Emery talks about, in his book Culture Sociology of Divorce, an encyclopedia, he talks about these fears and how they're a motivator that motivates this survival instinct. And he states that there is a level of abject terror in the idea that one's very psychological or physical survival is in jeopardy. All behavior is driven to seek safety in this state. And from a psychological perspective, cognitive distortions may be heightened. And so some of these cognitive distortions, as it gives the example that I can't experience happiness without this person. But another one could be something like, I'm not going to be able to do it. There's no way I can be on my own. Or, I've just got to stick it out, because I am hopeful that if I just do this, or if this changes, then I'm going to be okay. And it's all driven by this survival instinct and the motivation to stay what they once felt in the relationship, safe and secure. So hopefully that makes sense, and you can understand that just a little bit. But it's an important process that gets activated in the process of divorce that motivates that anxiety and fear that we're talking about today. Okay, so I've kind of summarized some of the most common fears about getting divorced. So the first fear that I've been able to identify in the research, and also my experience in working with clients who go through this process, is, as I mentioned, the fear of the future. Questions like, who gets to live in the home? Will we need to move? Where will we live? Divorce will mean a level of sacrifice, and it particularly is impactful mostly to women, because many of the women that are going through a divorce, whether they've chosen to stay home, or maybe they chose not to go back to school after having babies or whatever, they may not be prepared or know what to do in that situation. And so it requires them to give up what they've known, and they may not have as strong of confidence about being able to afford things that they've been used to because of the situation that they're facing. So divorce is really a time of not only an ending, but it's also a time for a new beginning. And so there's the grieving process of ending a relationship, but there's also the beginning of now what, where am I going to live? Where am I going to have my support? Who's going to be there for me? So there's a lot of things that go on in this process of giving up something and leaving something behind and not knowing what that fresh beginning is going to be, and all the factors that are going to need to be required to consider as you're making those new decisions. The second one is fear of being poor. Now, again, this can apply more to women statistically, but I do think that there is a new wave of women being more educated and being more prepared to be able to be financially more secure. But most of the time, this is a legitimate concern. And quite frankly, it's a concern for men as well, because if they are paying child support, their income is being taken much more into consideration of all the things that they're going to have to pay for that they didn't necessarily have to and live. So having two residences and two grocery bills and two utility bills and all these different things, both of them have to figure out how they're going to do that. And so the change in their financial status is pretty significant. And so, the questions of how will we be able to manage financially? How am I going to pay for child support? How am I going to be able to work and take care of the kids at the same time? These financial concerns tend to rank at the very top of all divorce anxiety issues, because money is something that can be both something that promotes power, but also powerlessness. And so we've got to take into consideration how hard that is in being able to kind of define how that's going to look. So the third fear is the fear of being alone. And as we kind of talked about this idea of survival instinct, I want to kind of come back to this idea of attachment. We as human beings are not meant to be alone. And we are wired in our brains to be connected to other human beings. And so when a family is breaking up, and these partners decide that they're going to separate, both of them may have that fear of being alone. Now, depending on the circumstances of why people are getting divorced, obviously, if there's an affair situation, that might be a little bit different. But there is that fear of I'm going to be alone, and we don't like that feeling of being alone for good reason. So there's a lot of fear in that. But I want to be specific about how these relationships change. It's not just them being alone. It's also losing connections that they once had with their in-laws, with mutual friends or couple friends that they used to hang out with neighbors, with even community that they may be involved in. And also, we don't think about this that much, but who gets the dog and who gets the cat? I mean, these are furry children for a lot of people. And it's really difficult to know who's going to end up with what. And pets can be really comforting because they are there and they're present. And so these are all things to consider when you're thinking about these types of fears of being alone. The next fear is obvious fear for your children. What's going to happen to the kids? It's probably one of the most common questions that couples will ask when they're considering divorce is what's going to happen with the kids? And unfortunately, this can be a really difficult process for couples when they're going through the divorce. They feel confident about the decision that they're making, but of course they're going to worry about their children. And so in many cases, children can both be a protective factor for couples because they might decide, we got to figure this out and work it out because of the kids, or they end up continuing to fight and continuing to have problems in front of the kids. And that can be really damaging for those relationships because kids are watching this and they're feeling it alongside the parents. And it doesn't feel safe to them either because they're watching the very people that they rely on for safety and security being completely insecure with each other. And so that then trickles down to the children. So, a lot of things will come up because there's such an emotional connection to the children. And it can, in some of the most difficult cases, be a power play where the spouses will fight over the children almost like a pawn, and that's not healthy, that's not good. And so, as a therapist, that's one of the things that I really work hard at, is to protect the children from being caught up in their issues, that they just need to show love and concern and reassurance to these children, so that they know that even though their parents are divorcing, that they still are being loved and taken care of, so that they don't have to worry about that. And so, custody can be a really ugly thing. Unfortunately, kids get pawned into this custody battle that's really between the parents. It's not about them at all. It's really just about a power play and who's going to have more time. And sometimes it just gets really, really ugly. So hopefully, they are being directed, whether it be through legal information or through a therapist, that they're going to be given that encouragement to not use children as pawns. And then the last one is the fear of emotional pain. Now, this is what this whole thing is really about, is none of us want to hurt. None of us want to be sad. None of us want to experience pain. And so when you're facing a divorce, you're really facing the death of a relationship. And a death of a relationship is not very tangible. It's kind of an intangible. You get married and maybe you have this big celebration, and lots of people come and they support you. And then you decide to get divorced, and it's just kind of this quiet thing that happens in the mail. One day you get a letter saying your divorce is official, and that's it. And there's really no ritual or anything that really helps individuals find closure in the process, and yet they're grieving. It's a grieving process. And so it's natural, it's normal, but a lot of people don't even understand what that might look like. So to be a little bit more specific, grief in divorce can cause emotional pain that looks like shock, denial, depression, anger, anxiety, fear. A lot of emotions are going to come up that are grief-based, not just fear about money or fear about it's grieving the loss of that relationship. And those are feelings of grief, not the other way around. So hopefully that makes sense. And so we want to be able to know that both individuals are going to suffer serious loss. And yet it can also be very liberating to also know that you can be more self-reliant, more independent, to no longer be living in such a chaotic or a conflict-based relationship. So there's benefits to divorce too, where people can actually rediscover their strengths and their abilities and their confidence as they learn that they are capable of doing something that maybe their spouse told them that they couldn't do. And so the key to surviving divorce is really being able to learn how to face these fears and cope with the challenges that are going to come with the process of going through a divorce. Now, I want to take just a minute here and talk about abuse for just a moment, because I think one of the things that isn't well known is how fear of divorce can be seen from an abuse lens. So if we have domestic violence going on, whether it be physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, there's a lot of things that people just simply don't see. And whether it be the perpetrator or the one who's receiving the abuse, there's a lot of secrecy and silence that goes on in these relationships. And if anyone knew that these things were happening, they would be absolutely shocked. And so a lot of people will stay in abusive relationships, not only for the fear of, something bad happening to them if they were to do anything or say anything. Obviously, they have very similar fears as we just talked about: fear of money, fear of future. How's this going to look? What about the kids? Because they're already feeling powerless in a situation. And so being able to have a conversation that could even be productive could actually be something that is not even possible between a couple if they have an abusive relationship going on. And so a lot of times, women in particular, but men can also be abused, stay in these types of relationships because they don't know that they can do something else. They don't have the confidence or the resources or the ability to be able to step outside. And so they endure a lot of very difficult situations, whether it be criticism, attack, just constant put downs, name calling, other things can be so damaging. And so they have an added challenge with their ability to overcome these challenges in facing, should I stay or should I go? So some of the most common internal questions that I have heard in my practice when I've actually dealt with this with individual clients, some of them could be, I can't let go, even though I know it's for the best. If I leave, I worry about what's going to happen to the kids. They need their dad. I know I should leave, but I'm not sure what's holding me back. Maybe it isn't as bad as I'm making it. He was so nice to me this week, but I'm just waiting for him to turn on me. I never know what I'm going to get. So it's kind of like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. I can't take it anymore, but I just don't know what to do. I don't know who I can trust. So there's a lot of different things. These women and men will feel so broken that they may not even believe they have the power or the ability to, and the strength to even leave. And so they feel stuck, they feel trapped in these situations. And these are the ones that are the most difficult for me to watch, because I know what's going on, but I also don't have a lot of power as a therapist to say you have to leave. I can encourage it, but ultimately it has to be their decision because they have to live with that decision. And so that's a really challenging thing as a therapist, to watch these kinds of things happen, knowing that they live in fear every day. It's not just the fear of divorce, it's the fear of just living in a home that doesn't necessarily feel safe to anyone. So I just wanted to just take a quick second and mention that, because I think that's an important point that we often forget. Okay, so I've listed a few steps to overcome some of the general fears of divorce. I'm going to go through each one of them quickly here. The first one is face the fear. In other words, just be honest with yourself and trust your instincts that this may not work. And it doesn't mean that you are a failure. It may mean that it's just simply that something that cannot be resolved. There's a lot of good reasons why people get divorced. But there are also a lot of reasons that people just give up. And sometimes, whether it's giving up or giving in to what is, the honesty with yourself and trusting your instincts is so important, to actually admit that you may not be able to sustain this relationship, because many of them are trying to do it alone, and it's simply just not going to work because you're not a partnership anymore. The second thing is you got to be careful and shoot down your critical voice, the blaming, the shaming, or the fear mongering that tells you that you can't do this. What is the reason why we have a critical voice? Well, it may be to scare yourself and to self-sabotage your safety or your well-being because you don't trust yourself. And so sometimes the critical voice can be really damaging, but it can also be a protective factor too. So we got to understand, what is the reason why I'm being so afraid and blaming or shaming myself or the other person. So you got to really challenge and ask questions to help you be able to really work through some of those fears and the voices in your head. One thing that I think is a really powerful tool that I use in therapy is actually having the person write down your truth. Journals don't talk back. They don't tell you you're stupid. They don't tell you that you shouldn't feel the way that you feel. They don't tell you to be afraid of this, that, or the other because it's a threat to them. No matter what you write down, if you can do it in a way that feels safe to you, and oftentimes you can't even write down in a journal. Maybe you have to do it online with a password protection or something. But regardless, to be able to transfer what's in our heads onto paper, to put it somewhere else, actually helps us to be able to create a more objective perspective. And so oftentimes when things are all jumbled up in our minds, because we're so emotional about them, we have a very difficult time being able to see things with a more objective lens. So being able to write things down helps you begin to process things. And then when you read these things back to yourself, the great thing is you're able to better understand what it is that's going on with you. You see it and hear it from a different lens. And so that can be really, really helpful to just write down your thoughts and start processing them in a more objective way. I think it's important to talk. I mean, obviously, I'm a therapist. I'm going to encourage you to get some help, to go and talk to somebody. But also, if you have a trusted friend or a family member, a clergy member, anyone that you feel safe to talk to, a lawyer could also be that person if you need to, because especially for us as both clinicians and lawyers, we have a ethical boundary of confidentiality, and we're going to make sure that you're going to feel safe in those conversations, to know that anything that we talk about is going to be kept confidential, so you can say whatever it is you need to say. And then to get feedback from an unbiased, unemotional person, it can be so helpful to be able to just talk about the fears that you may be having. Again, in counseling, when I'm working with couples, I think being able to help them kind of know what to expect in the divorce process. Oftentimes, in my past experience, if I'm working with a client and they come to the conclusion, this just isn't going to work, we're going to get divorced. I think, for me, one of the most important jobs that I have is to just normalize, what? It's okay that you have made this decision to get divorced. You've clearly done everything that you feel you can do to make amends or to heal or to repair the relationship. And, many people come to that conclusion, and there isn't one right way or wrong way to come to that. And so just normalizing and to know that they're not alone, that people make these decisions every day. In fact, over 50% of people don't necessarily end up being married long-term. And that's kind of a scary thing. So just being able to normalize that conflict and, resolution doesn't necessarily always, go hand in hand, and that it's okay for them if they feel like that's the thing that they need to do. I think another process that I try to help people do is to identify specifically what their fears are. So I've talked about a few generalized ones, but there may be ones that aren't even listed that this particular person may have that is very unique to their situation. So helping them to be able to voice and identify what their fears are is a really helpful process. Clearly being able to listen to a person, to hear their story, to hear their complaints, to be able to reflect back or reframe their situation in a way that they feel heard and seen. Because many of these individuals, when they come to this point in time, their partner is no longer listening to them. They are no longer feeling heard and understood. And so being able to have that process available to them and, have a safe environment to hold those thoughts and those feelings is such a powerful, relieving process for many, many people. I think being able to help people identify what is your support system. Okay, if you're talking to a therapist, that's great. I'm one of those people, but who else is out there? Who else can give you the support that you need? You need to be able to do self-care. You need to be able to take care of yourself, because there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress and a lot of difficulty that comes with these kinds of issues. And so being able to help them to find, people in their community or their family or friends that can be there to support them, outside of therapy in my particular case, but in general, just to know that they're not alone in this process and that they have people that they can turn to and rely on is such an important process for people to be able to identify those things. And then finally, another thing that, I can help them do is to find the resources that they need, whether it be legally or emotionally or just logistically, who can watch the kids so I can go to therapy or meet with the lawyer or whatever, just helping them finding the resources out there. Support groups are so important for a lot of individuals who have gone through a divorce, to know that there are other people out there going through the very same thing, and to experience from that lens, that there are other people out there that I can talk to and they can understand, and I don't have to, be complicated in what I want to share or say. So helping them to be able to know what resources are out there is a really empowering process for a lot of people. So I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit faster because of time, but the next one is to stop engaging in desperate or compensatory behaviors. If you're doing things that are risky, like drinking too much, which I've seen a lot with some of my clients, or doing anything that's numbing to them, the most important thing is you need to stop it, because what you're doing is you're kind of kicking the can down the road. You're really not dealing with the things that are creating more problems for you than helping you. And oftentimes even, some certain behaviors and or activities can actually increase your anxiety and fear. It doesn't necessarily help you. So you gotta know what you need to do to stop those. When it does come time to have this conversation with your partner, it's so important to be honest, to be able to be transparent and to be able to talk with them about your feelings. Sometimes in these experiences, a lot of these couples will feel like their partner just doesn't listen to them. And so there's a lot of strategies that, for me as a clinician, I can teach to help them be able to script out what they want to say, to have boundaries set so that they know, hey, this is the way we're going to talk about this. And if you can't talk about this, then we'll come back to this conversation. There's many things that I can teach individuals to help them script out how they feel, identifying through, an earlier process, and then be able to be prepared to share the things that they need to say to their partner. And to know that, when you bring this up, again, for some people, they know it's coming. For other people, it's completely unexpected. And so we don't know how people are going to react. And so we need to kind of role play, if you will, to know, in this situation, this is what I'm going to do. If he yells at me, or if she walks away or whatever, then this is how I'm going to handle that situation. And so being able to have that kind of a dialogue so you could be prepared for the conversation and be ready for whatever might happen can be really helpful to walk through, but to also just to be courageous in being transparent with what you need to say. And then finally, give your partner some time. Sometimes when you are the one that's instigating the divorce, it's a lot for a person to digest, because again, whatever survival instinct you've had kicked in for several weeks in making the decision gets kicked in immediately if this person is not ready to hear this information. And so be able to have patience with your partner to digest what's going on, and to hear that you want to end your marriage, and that you want to do it in a way that can be really positive, that can alleviate some of the fear in the process, and realize that no amount of time is ever going to help them come to the same conclusion that you have. They're not going to necessarily have the same experience, even though it's the same marriage. They're going to have a different experience with the process, and to just allow them to do what they need to do. They're going to grieve differently. They're going to experience it differently. They're going to feel it differently. And to know that, that's a process that they're going to have to go through, and hopefully they'll be able to have support on the other side. So that's kind of my presentation. So if you have any questions, I'll turn it back to Lindsay.
Thank you, Emily. That was a really nice presentation. It was really liked all the pictures and everything. One question I thought of is, I was wondering, when you were talking about different fears of divorce, have you ever found that people are afraid of what the community might think of them, or like other parents, the PTA, or members at church? Have you found a lot of fear that way too? Just the fear of the social repercussions of projecting that you have this perfect marriage and then you're getting divorced. Like, do you see a lot of fear about that type of divorce?
Oh, absolutely. So it's such a great point that, we live in community, and a lot of people will be completely shocked that you are having problems, especially if you have hid it. I think one of the most common things that I'll see is actually within families, but communities definitely are impacted by this as well. So I'm currently seeing a client, a couple who is in the process of trying to decide if they want to stay together. And they've been struggling for like 3 years, and they finally disclosed something to their parents, and they were completely shocked. And why do we do that? Well, a lot of it, there's different motivations, but I think one of the reasons why we hide our problems is we simply have shame. We have shame that what are people going to think, and so they just don't say anything. Again, if there's something going on like an addiction that could be motivating why somebody wants to get divorced, or if there's been an affair, these are not things that you're going to go and hang out and tell your neighbor. So obviously, there's privacy, and there's need for privacy to protect both partners involved. But if a person does end up getting a divorce, people will automatically make judgments no matter what they know. And I think that's one of the things that we can do as clinicians is help prepare, whether or not, they understand it really doesn't matter, because it's your decision. You have to live with it. And people do naturally have judgment that comes because they don't know the full story. So yes, there's always going to be a reaction of shock and denial that they may experience socially. And because people simply just don't know what to do or say, it's more their issue than the issue of the person going through that. So I think being able to kind of normalize that for people is really helpful, to say, people are going to have their own views on what happened here, but your truth, remember what you wrote down, stay true to that, and you'll be okay. And so you just kind of have to give them a little bit more time to see who's going to be their friend, because that's another thing, is people will either be there with you or they will leave you, which is why people don't get divorced as part of the process. So
Yeah.
did I answer your question?
That does. I had one other question or kind of thought when you were talking about the different types of abuse, women or men that are in abusive relationships that don't want to leave because of fear. And one of the ones that I thought about as you're going through the list is also the fear of threats, right? Of like, if you divorce me, then I'm going to tell the court that you did this, or that you're an unfit parent. I'm going to take the kids away. They're going to be with me. I'm going to have full custody, Yeah. And so I was thinking about how that's definitely another fear of people in abusive relationships, of like, whenever someone brings up divorce, it's like, oh, you think you can divorce me? Well, who else would want you? That beat down mentality of like, no one, you're lucky I took you. No one else wants you. And if you divorce me, then I'll take the kids, right? And so I feel like
I've definitely seen that, and it is so ugly, and it is so wrong, and it is so bad. And I think one of the things that I've been able to do with some of those situations, one in particular is coming to my mind, where I just reassure. Where's the evidence? This person is threatening you. What do you know to be true? And just really getting them to turn back to themselves, to know their truth, and to be completely honest. Even knowing those things, people stay. And it's, unfortunate that they put themselves at that risk, but a lot of the motivation, especially with women, is their kids. They put up with abuse to keep their kids in a home with food and clothing and the things that they know. And so many times it is a very common outcome where people just stay in abusive relationships because of their fear. And definitely when you're looking at an abuser, they control you by fear. And so when there is an opportunity to have some intervention, what I've seen is by giving people time and giving them the support and the resources that they need to help them see it for themselves. No matter how much I talk blue in the face, they may see and hear all these things, but eventually they will come to it. And then that's where you begin doing the resourcing, where you really empower them with, this is what's available. You can do this. I'm here for you. And just to help them know they're not alone. Sometimes that can make a huge, huge difference. But your point is well made. I think that abuse is a very difficult situation, no matter what it is. But emotional abuse, honestly, I think is harder than a physical abuse because
Can't prove it.
plays in your
Yep.
mind,
Yep.
So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for your time and your presentation and your knowledge.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Thank you so much for the invitation. And please let me know if anyone has any questions. I'd be happy to answer them. You can provide them with my contact info.